Okay. So we will record this lecture for those of you who are not here, so that they can view this at a later date. Okay. So let's start out with concepts in archaeology. No? Yung may mga basic concepts muna. Okay. When you look at the term archaeology, literally, pag tinignan natin yan, halimbawa at hinimay-himay dun sa Greek origin ng term na yan, archaeologos, no? Literally, the study of the old, ang ibig sabihin niyan. Pero meron din naman tayong mga discipline na ang pakay nila ay mag-aral din ng tungkol sa mga luma, no? Lumang bagay, siguro lumang pamumuhay, ganyan. No? Like history. Diba? Tungkol din yan sa mga sinaunang buhay. Ganyan, no? Pero ngayon, the definition of history nowadays is becoming what would we say, no? Complicated or complex na lang, no? Complex. Hindi na lang yung pag-aaral ng nakaraan, no? Pero yung the way how you interpret data or information, no? Is also an integral part nowadays of the definition of history, no? The sources where you derive this, the way how you interpret it, no? All are part of the definition nowadays of history, no? Pero bumalik tayo sa archaeology, no? So archaeology as a study of the old would be centered on the study of culture, no? Because this is an anthropology class. We will contextualize archaeology within anthropology. Kasi hindi naman universal yung definition ng archaeology or hindi universal yung tingin ng archaeology as part of anthropology. Kasi sa Europe iba yung kwento diyan, no? Iba yung development ng archaeology. Pag sinabi nating anthropology, madalas sa Europe, ang ibig na lang sabihin ay physical anthropology but not so much on social anthropology. The way as seen by the Americans or in the American tradition. Kasi di ba sa American tradition, the way you are being taught now, no? With regards anthropology, meron tayong subfields which we will later on, the next slide, we will go into that. So as of now, our study of archaeology is focused on culture, no? Katulad din ng anthropology, no? In general. And of course, society. And that means human society kasi naman pwede namang non-human society. No? Halimbawa, the other primates have societies of their own, even other animals. Halimbawa, bees, the insects, no? Ants. Also, birds have their own communities which we can call societies. No? But with anthropology, we are concerned with human societies and anthropology too. No? Yung pagkakaiba nga lang ng archaeology, it is about past human societies, no? The history of human beings in particular. So, di ba, culture, society. No? Ang sociology mahilig dun sa term na society. No? Pero pagdating sa anthropology, no, magmula nung anthropology 100 siguro, no, you are seeing that the professor always talks about culture, no, more than the way sociologists do. So we are focused on culture, no, patterns of communal behavior, halimbawa. that we can see in many things, in the way we act, we behave, we relate to others, in the way we make things, in the way we see our environment, in the way we think. No? Merong sinasabi ng mga social scientists, may pattern yan. Okay, and archaeology is about the past. Although, wait muna, no? Kasi ngayon, minsan, pati yung present, isinasama nila sa pag-aaral ng archaeology. No? Pero sinasama nila yung pag-aaral ng present sa archaeology in order to know more about the past. No? So sometimes they also study behaviors of the present. Kaya palagi naman din gano'n, no? Tungkol sa nakaraan, or it is about the past that archaeologists love to study. Sometimes they also involve studies about present behavior, about present human behavior, because sa tingin nila baka meron silang mapulot tungkol sa tungkol sa nakaraan, no? Yung mga pag-uugali or kaugalian ng mga nakaraang panahon. And of course, this would be only possible, well, not only, no? Again, meron na naman tayong dito, no, disclaimer, no, na physical remains lang yung pwedeng pag-aralan kasi minsan pinag-aaralan din nila language. Okay? Even genes, halimbawa, in order to know something about the past. No? But generally, it has been the tradition of archaeology that knowledge about the past, in particular past culture and society, have been deriving from the study of physical remains from the past. Okay? So ito muna yung yung titignan natin sa archaeology, no? Yung delineation ng archaeology, no? As we define the term and we delimit the scope, no, of the discipline. Okay, any questions so far? Maybe one question. Meron kayong gustong itanong tungkol dito? Okay, parang wala pa, no? Okay, so let's move on. So I've mentioned that archaeology in our class will be seen as part of the bigger discipline of anthropology. Anthropology itself is a social science, diba? Along with sociology, with psychology, ano pa yung alam niyo na social sciences. Ito review na lang naman nun, no? Ng siguro mga iba yung courses. Political science, halimbawa, even economics, no? Would be social science. Meron pa ba akong nakaligtaan? Economics, even management. Yung mga iba, management would they would consider this as part of the social sciences because it is concerned with human behavior, no? Management. Okay, so these are the 4 subdivisions of anthropology. You have archaeology as one of them. No? Alam nyo na yung social anthropology. Siguro lahat yan pinag-usapan nyo na nung Anthropology 100. No? So all of these are about human behavior. Yun nga lang, social anthropology is concerned with present or contemporary culture and society. So for example, if you want to study the ethnic groups of the Cordillera region or Northern Luzon or any other places in the Philippines in particular, you do the methods of social anthropology at present. Halimbawa, yung gusto nyong malaman yung community behavior na pangkasalukuyan. So what do? You make or you do an ethnography, di ba? At alam niyo na siguro yan. No? When you do ethnography, you go to the community, medyo maproseso yung paraan, medyo matagal. No? It will not be readily achievable. Na? Halimbawa, isang araw would be impossible. No? Although yung mga iba, halimbawa sa marketing, sa management, no, they would consider just observing and getting information about a particular, halimbawa, group of people and the way they relate to a product, halimbawa, a commercial product as ethnography. No? Pero technically, when anthropologists define ethnography, hindi ganun ka-simple yon. Okay, so ano yung pinag-aaralan natin sa social anthropology? Yung social organization halimbawa ng isang community or group of people. This could be an ethnic group or a group not really defined by ethnicity. No? Pwede rin namang ganon. No? Oftentimes when the group of people or the community is not defined by ethnicity, ano yan, no? Kinahihiligan yan ng mga sociologists, because anthropology in general, no, or it has been the tradition that anthropologists have studied communities that are defined by ethnicity. Kadalasan ganon, no? Pero hindi na palaging ganon. Actually, sociology and anthropology minsan ano yan, no? Nag-i-intersect. Madalas nag-i-intersect yan. So that we have, for example, sa ano na lang, UP Baguio, di ba? Pwede sigurong yung subjects na itinuturo sa anthropology would be similar to those being offered in sociology. Halimbawa sa Ateneo de Manila, no, sa Katipunan, sa Quezon City, no, yung department din ng anthropology nila ay pinagsanib sa sociology. So magkaparehong discipline ay nandoon, no, sociology and anthropology, while psychology is, I think, in another department. Okay. And then physical anthropology, some of you have taken this up. No? I think many of you, no? If not under my section, maybe some of my colleagues' section. So physical anthropology is the study of, ano ang physical anthropology? Sino na yung mga nakakuha? Sino na yung mga Jowenfeld? Si Jowenfeld.
Hindi po pala ako naka-ano. Sorry po. Bali po sa amin po, ang ginamit pong pangalan ng subject ay bio-anthro.
Okay.
Pero, opo. So, doon po sa bio-anthro, nag-focus po kami sa human evolution.
Okay.
And then nag-stop po kami sa sa mga bones po ng humans.
Okay. Okay, sige. Tama naman. No? So madalas synonymous yung term na physical anthropology at biological anthropology. Physical kasi yung katawan, no? Pinag-uusapan, katawan ng tao. No? Biological kasi nga katawan ng tao, which is biological. Bakit natin gustong pag-aralan ito with regards anthropology? Kasi nakikita natin na baka may pwedeng sabihin yung biological makeup ng tao when it comes to culture. No? Halimbawa, sinasabi nila na the development or the advancement, quote-unquote, no? Halimbawa, pag nandun tayo sa pananaw na merong cultural progression, yung development nito, no, yung acceleration halimbawa ng culture ay baka may kinalaman yung development din ng human body doon. So for example, the way thinking, human thought has developed might have correlations with the development of the human brain, halimbawa. No? Sinasabi nila halimbawa na lumalaki halimbawa yung part ng brain na nag-iisip na hindi lamang doon sa mga instincts ganyan or yung mga emotions kundi pati na rin yung ano no yung cognitive aspect no? Yun yung lumalaki at napapansin din kasi nila na yung culture baka pwedeng i-correlate dun sa development na yon. So not only the brain but even the other parts of the body. Halimbawa yung kamay, yung paa, yung the trend towards bipedalism. Pag sinabing bipedal, yung walking on two limbs. Tapos yung dalawa natin, yung four limbs natin, halimbawa in our case, they are free to do other activities like making tools, ganyan, no? And other activities. Okay, so ganyan kaimportante din yung nakikita nila dun sa biological makeup ng tao, kaya nila isinama yung pag-aaral ng biological makeup as a part of anthropology. Okay, so titignan muna natin yung chat messages. Okay, so nasagot ko na yan, no? Bioanthro or biological anthro is called physical anthropology. It's about bones, but it's not only about bones, no? In general, kaya tayo nag-aaral ng buto, no? Kasi gusto natin malaman kung ano yung implications nito, no? Yung pwede natin sabihin dun sa overall katawan ng tao. Hindi lang naman din kasi buto yung pwede natin pag-aralan, pati yung mga ibang parte ng katawan ng tao, no? Technically, no? But then yung mga naiwan halimbawa ng mga australopithecines, ganyan, yung mga ibang hominids, wala nang soft tissue yun. So, we will just have to be contented with studying human bones. Those things that remain from the past. Okay, so hindi lang bones, pati katawan ng tao. No? Yung physical anthropology kasi, no, unfortunately in UP Baguio, we only have one subject on physical anthropology, and that is Human Evolution 104. No? So we try to include all. No? Pero yung mga iba, halimbawa they have more than one subject on physical anthropology. They make one course halimbawa into a laboratory or into a sort of a laboratory subject where they measure halimbawa parts of the human body, fats, no, yung mga vital statistics. I think you're familiar with that, no, yung waistline, etc., yung head circumference, diameter. Okay, so yun yung part ng exercises nila in order to see if it has correlations with the way humans behave. Pala yung BMI, di ba? Para dun sa mga nag-aral na those who have taken up Anthropology 104. No? Yung BMI is one part of that measurement. Body mass index. No? So environment and human evolution po. Yes. No? So environment is a part of that. No? Kasi marami nag-iisip na anthropologists na malaki yung kinalaman ng environment sa human evolution or sa human morphological or bodily development. Okay, so mostly anthropometry, yes. No? Anthropometry is the study and practice of measuring the human body and parts of it. Okay, so merong question si Carlo dito. Mostly po pag anthropometry ba ay physical, tapos pag bio naman po more complex na, no? So anthropometry, tulad nga nung sinabi ko, is about measurement, no? Metrics. So it is a study of the measurements, no? So itong anthropometry is like your ethnography na method in order to arrive at at an end, no? In order to arrive at results. Pag bio naman po more complex na. So bioanthropology or biological anthropology is the term that can be used to encompass all of that study, no? Biological anthropology. Okay. But the other primates, yes, and other primates kasama. Okay. So next we have linguistics. Bakit natin pinag-aaralan yung linguistics? Because language, lalong-lalo na oral communication, is used most of the time in order to learn a culture, in order to teach a culture, no? To teach and to learn a culture. No? Diba? Pero hindi lang din naman yun, no? You can also learn a culture through copying. No? Halimbawa, yung mga non-verbal communication. You could also do that. You can also learn through trial and error. No? Pero sa atin, no, madalas sinasabi yan. No? Tinuturuan kung paano tayo tinuturuan ay sinasabi, no? Yung dapat natin matutunan. And language is not universal in form, no? Marami yan, no? Kaya kailangan din ng anthropologist na pag-aralan. Kaya mahilig sila din mag-aral tungkol sa mga wika, no? Tungkol sa lingwahe. Kaya halimbawa, the structure of a language, diba, ang Tagalog, for example, would be different in structure from English. Meron kayo halimbawang mga nasasabi sa Tagalog na hindi nyo masasabi sa English and vice versa. Diba? Halimbawa, merong mga, yung pronouns na lang, diba? Pag sinabing siya, no, yung third person singular, sa Tagalog, hindi mo alam kung specifically kung babae ba siya or lalaki or otherwise, di ba? Pero sa English, alam mo, no? He, she, or it, no? Kasama din sa pronoun niya. Meron din halimbawang mga languages na sa konting syllables pa lang nasabi mo na lahat, no? Halimbawa, no? Mandarin halimbawa, Chinese would be an example of that, no? Pero dun sa mga Austronesian languages like Tagalog and bahasa Malaysian or Indonesian, no? Medyo mahaba yung construction nila. And also the way halimbawa we do things, no? The way we relate to others in doing things, or the way we relate to our environment, and the way we say or describe it, no? I am talking halimbawa about tenses, no? Mga verb tenses. Iba-iba din 'yon, no? So tayo familiar halimbawa tayo that the verb is only conjugated, no? In our languages, English at saka Tagalog, and also Ilocano and Kapampangan. Yes, I think only the verb is generally conjugated, no? Pero in other languages like I don't know with the other languages, but Sanskrit, you have to conjugate most of the words in a sentence. No? Hindi pwedeng yung verb conjugations lang ang i-memorize nyo. Lahat yan i-memorize nyo, no? Kung paano kino-conjugate as to gender, as to temporality or tenses, no? Yung past, present, future, as to the number of persons or individuals referred to, okay? Things like that. No? So iba-iba, no? Iba-iba. Kaya they take up also a significant part of anthropology. No? And then finally, archaeology. No? If social anthropology is the present tense of anthropology, archaeology is the past tense of anthropology, so to speak. Okay? Now I'm stuck. Okay. Next slide. So among the things that we talk about in anthropology, in archaeology, is the archaeological site. No? Pag sinabing archaeological site, it is the place where archaeological information or archaeological data, for those of you who would like to rephrase it into a scientific, in scientific terms. Archaeological information or data is derived from this place. Particularly, we access it through excavation. So this is an archaeological site. This one is in Surigao del Norte. Another archaeological site would be found in Palawan, and there are many of them in Palawan. I think you are familiar with the Tabon Caves. The Tabon Caves, from where the so-called Tabon man, one of the oldest, hindi na siya yung oldest ngayon because the oldest is the Kalaw man. So the Tabon man was found in the Tabon Cave complex in Quezon Municipality in Palawan. No? But aside from that, we have also other archaeological sites like the one in El Nido. No? So I think we are familiar with El Nido as a tourist destination, but in El Nido we also have archaeological sites. No? And at present, the Archaeological Studies program in Diliman have been doing excavations in El Nido since 22 years ago. Oh, yes, 2021? 22 years ago. 23. Actually 23 years ago, no? But because of the pandemic, so the office didn't do excavations since last year, 2020. We also have archaeological sites underwater. No, hindi lang naman dun sa dry land, no? Or terrestrial. Kundi meron din tayo sa ilalim ng dagat. For example, this is an underwater site or underwater archaeological site. This is the site of the San Diego. San Diego is the galleon. So as you might have noticed, ang archaeology would not only be about the pre-colonial past or pre-colonial Philippines, but also of the colonial period. Even the post-colonial period could be considered as part of archaeology, but it is not conventionally being considered. Pero technically pwede. Yung mga hilig kasi ng archaeologists natin, karamihan ng archaeologists ngayon is the subject of their study would be the pre-colonial Philippines. Pagdating sa mga more recent periods, parang medyo, ano na yan, hindi na high-tech. Kaya hindi na sila masyadong interested dyan. But technically, we can also include that. in the study of archaeology. Karamihan kasi sa atin, the older the better, the more sikat. No? Pero hindi naman dapat ganun. Okay, chat message. Gusto ko rin sana pumunta sa Galleon of San Diego but I don't know how to swim. No? Oo. Mahirap yan. And the National Museum discourages going to halimbawa yung wala tayong permit to excavate or to visit an archaeological site, no? Dinidiscourage siya ng National Museum and the community of scholars in general. But we can see the artifacts in the National Museum. No? They have a superb gallery there on the San Diego. I think kung hindi pa nila binabago yung ayos ngayon, no, nandun pa rin. I think some of you have been there, lalong-lalo na yung mga palagi sa Maynila, no. Okay, and when you participate in underwater archaeology, yes, you are taught how to dive. Ako hindi ako marunong diving, although nakasubok na rin ako only once. Pero ito ay kailangan ng talaga, no, professional divers. Because the way you conduct archaeological excavations inland, ipapatong mo doon yung skill mo in diving, no? So underwater, gagawin mo din yung skill na yun, no? ng pag hukay, and then pag-handle ng archaeological artifacts, no? Para hindi masira yung archaeological data. Regarding po ba sa mga excavations, ano po na nangyayari? Ano pa ang nangyayari after? Tapos paano po make sure, no? How to make sure na sa process ng excavation, hindi maapektuhan yung state ng land. For example, being an unexcavated land, can it still be used for farming? Yes, of course, it can still be used. Sandali, kukunin ko yung relo kasi hindi ko alam kung time na. I need a clock in front of me. Okay, when doing an archaeological excavation, okay, naririnig niyo pa ba ako?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so when doing an archaeological excavation, kailangan may plano ka, no? Hindi lang basta pumunta ka doon and then hukay and then goodbye na, ganyan. So you have to detail your project by writing a proposal, no? Tapos nakalagay doon kung ano yung gagawin mo doon sa isang excavation before it gets approved in order to receive your permit. Ganon naman yan. So titignan pa rin ng authorities sa National Museum yon. No? So doon sa proposal, you will detail halimbawa kung ilang araw yan na gagawin mo. And then after that, no, kailangan may backfill, no? After the whole excavation, kailangan may backfilling pa rin, no? Hindi mo iiwanan na nakabukas yun, no? Except in very rare instances. For example, I think you are familiar with Dr. Robert Fox. Siguro nabanggit na yan since elementary days yun, about the Tabon Cave. When he excavated the Tabon Caves, I think he did not leave or he left, no, mali. He left the excavation site open. Ibig sabihin hindi nila ibinalik yung backfill, no, for other excavators to continue. I'm not sure if he did that or the succeeding excavators, no? Because when we went there, matagal na rin naman to, no? Many years ago. When I went there, no, I still saw the trenches, no? And then the mounds of earth beside them. So hindi nila ibinalik. So merong mga purposes yan. No? Otherwise, in general, we do backfilling in order for the land to be used again for farming, ano pa, for building houses and buildings. Okay? So maraming instances why we do archaeological excavations, and most of the time hindi din natin hindi ideal yung situations. So there is a term for example that we use, archaeological impact assessment, in order to check if an area has cultural materials, no? Old cultural materials. For example, when a company, no, real estate company, decides on a building a housing project or a mall, halimbawa, no, in a particular real estate or property, sometimes if they are sensitive to cultural heritage issues, they would call on archaeologists to examine the place. And of course, archaeologists should do this in a very systematic way, no? In a limited number of days. Na hindi pwedeng yung 1 month naguhukay ka pa rin, no? Minsan halimbawa 3 days would be enough. Kaya mabilisan yan. And after that, ibabalik ulit para matuloy yung project ng real estate company. So these are, I'm showing you the scenarios, no, in which archaeological excavations may be done. Hindi lang yung puros ideal state na we go to a place and then do our study there by excavating. Minsan hindi less ideal yung situations. Pero ang dami, okay, another question, pero ang daming artifacts sa National Museum na puno ng coral, sir. Okay, yes, marami. No? So they have this office there with a laboratory in order to clean the artifacts. So a group of people is tasked to do that. So they are also trained to do that. Merong mga kailangan na training sa limbawa, no? For them to anong tawag doon? Yung remove the for example, yung mga incrustations ng artifacts. Restoration, no? Restoration. Kakalimutan ko. Restorative activities being done by the National Museum. Okay, from Nicole, puro din jars. Okay. So yes, maraming artifacts pa sa National Museum, and not all of them are being displayed or curated in the galleries. Yung mga iba nakatago pa, no? Because of their fragility. Okay, I'm stuck again. Okay. So next slide is the site of Santa Ana in Manila. No? This was a site excavated in the 1960s. And this is a burial site, na B-U-R-I-A-L, burial, libingan. Why is the Santa Ana site important? It is because It is one of the few archaeological sites that represent the culture of Manila, no? The ancient culture of Manila. Okay, so what do we usually investigate in archaeology? So when you do an excavation, hindi lang naman ganon, no? You are happy doing excavation because you like it and you want to find an artifact and that's it, no? Hindi ganun lang yun, no? You want to answer questions as like most academic disciplines. We also pose some questions, no? Tulad halimbawa sa social anthropology, no? We want to know the culture of a particular group of people. Pero what parts of their culture do we like to examine, no? So yun yung mga itinatanong. Ihimay-himayin natin 'yan, no? So halimbawa for the traditional anthropologists, they would love seeing culture as composed of many aspects, di ba? Nandiyan yung economic aspect, yung political aspect, yung religious aspect, no? So in archaeology, we can also apply that. And one of the most common or basic questions that we will be asking would be, what is their sustenance? Paano sila nabuhay noon, no? To put it at the most basic level, ano yung kinain nila, no? What was their food? And how did they get that? Diba? Minsan merong isang anthropologist, nakalimutan ko na kung sino, na nagsabi na yung culture is no, pwede natin tignan in terms of food, in terms of subsistence halimbawa. Diba? You are being familiarized, no, with categories of societies in anthropology, no? So oftentimes we classify societies as hunters and gatherers, di ba? Ano ba yung hunters and gatherers, no? The ones that don't plant crops, don't take care of animals for food and other purposes, but they go and look, no, in their immediate surroundings for food, no? They hunt for animals, for example, or they gather plants and small animals, for example, mollusks or shells, or crustaceans, halimbawa, no, yung mga crabs, hipon, ganyan. And then we also classify other societies as agricultural or agriculturists. Ano yung agricultural or agriculturists? Those that depend on domesticated crops primarily. Sometimes we also include those that tend livestock, no? But in this case, if mostly they tend livestock, we call them pastoralists. Pastoral. Diba for those of you who are in the Christian or Catholic faith, diba, you are familiar with this, no? Pastoral, yung term minsan na ginagamit ng mga pare or yung mga clergy. Kasi sa Israel, no, in the Middle East, yung society na doon ay basically one that tends livestock. Halimbawa, sheep, goat, cattle. Okay, so tinatawag sila na pastoralist. Yung mga agriculturist naman, ano ba, yung mga Pinoy, no, would be more of an agriculturalist agriculturalist society than of pastoralist one. The Chinese too, no, would more be more of an agriculturalist society. Okay, merong chat message. Mga diseases din po sir regarding sa subsistence. Bakit at paano po sila namamatay? Okay, yes, I will be mentioning that, no. Naunahan mo na ako, Nicole. I will be putting on the lights first. Sandali, madilim na dito. And then may follow-up question. Sa pagkain po ba or baka napana lang po sila ng kalaban? Yes. Okay. So, yung mga susunod na slides, itignan natin. Tungkol dito yan. Okay. So, what did they use for sustenance? What did they eat? Sa atin ba, ano yung classification ng society natin, no? Sa panahon ngayon? No? Are we pastoralists? Are we agriculturalists? Are we hunters and gatherers? Kasi halimbawa kung kayo ay nagutom, 'di ba? Mag-i-stock na kayo ng pagkain, no, bago kayo magutom, no? Kasi yung marami sa atin ay magaling na magplano, no? But where do we get our food? No? From no? Saan ba? So Save More, halimbawa, no? We get our food from Save More or Pure Gold. Saan pa? Sa Talipapa or sa yung mga iba siguro sa inyo sa 7-Eleven o kung saan man, no? So in this case, we buy food, we trade. We participate in trading. Consumer man tayo, no, kasi yung trader would not apply to us, no, yung mga end users or consumers, no. Pero basically the whole process is about trading. So hindi tayo hunters and gatherers, mukhang hindi rin tayo agriculturalists or horticulturalists. Yung horticultural yung maliit na smaller scale of agriculture, yung mga gardeners halimbawa. Horticultural. I think I have to write that. Anyway, I think you know that. So trading ang ano natin, no? We are part of the trade. May chat message ulit. Hand tools po, ganun. More on human efforts. Pag horti. Yes. Na? And also, more importantly, so horticulture. Horticultural. Would be smaller scale agriculture. No? Ganun na lang natin muna siya tawagin. Na-send ko dapat pala sa lahat ko sinend. Okay? So smaller scale agriculture. Okay. Sige. Although may mga iba na magkakahalo, no? Halimbawa, yung mga lalong-lalo na yung mga nasa maliliit na baryo o barangay, no? Halimbawa, they can be farmers sa atin, no, sa Pilipinas, they can be farmers, but during rainy season, they can also be gatherers, no? What do I mean by this? No, halimbawa, yung mga kumakain ng saluyot, no? Sino sa inyo ang kumakain ng saluyot? Yun yung saluyot, yung malagkit, no? Or yung mga himbabao halimbawa, no? That is another plant. Yes, may nagre-raise ng hand. Kasi familiar sa saluyot, no? Okay, so these are lalong-lalo na yung saluyot, ano? So a saluyot is one example of a plant that you do not take care of. Dumadating na lang siya pag halimbawa tag-ulan, di ba? Parang I don't know with you, but I think I haven't seen a garden of saluyot, no? Because in our country, we just get saluyot from the surroundings and when it is available during the rainy season. Ganun din halimbawa sa yung mga maliliit na animals that we eat. Halimbawa, for those of you in Pampanga, ano yung mole cricket? Kalimutan ko. Nasa Ilocano, ararawan, no?
Sa Lagubang po ba yun, sir?
Yung sa Lagubang, iba pa yun. No? The mole cricket, yung nakikita sa rice fields bago ito tamnan. So when you till the fields, no, yung halimbawa medyo basa na, makikita nyo ito. Nakalimutan ko na sa Kapampangan yung tawag. Kamaru pala. I think some of you will be familiar with that. No? So these things, no? these animals, kamaru, and then yung...
Susuhong po, sir.
Ano yon?
Susuhong po dito sa amin.
Yun ba yon yung mole cricket?
Apo, sir.
Anong language dyan?
Ang alam ko po, sir, Tagalog po, pero sinasabi din po ng mga Ilocano yun, susuhong po yung tawag nila.
Suhong. Kasi ang naririnig ko ararawan sa Ilocano. Sa Tagalog, hindi ko kasi alam kung madalas kinakain yan. Baka dati nung madalas kinakain, pero ngayon kasi sa around Manila parang hindi popular na pagkain yan. No? In Pampanga, yes, it is a popular delicacy. Okay, so yung mga animals na yun, no? And then tulya. I don't know if you're still familiar with tulya, no? Yung maliliit na clams na kukuha din sa tubigan. So these are animals that we don't take care of, but we just go to their habitat and then we gather them. If they are available, no? Because many of them are seasonal lang. So hunters and gatherers have to contend, no, with the changes in the season, no? And the availability of food supply. Okay. And then how did they get their food? Ito ba ay through hunting? Paano sila halimbawa humuli ng isda? Sinisibat ba nila? Or do they use a hook and line? Or do they use nets or baskets or fish traps, no? Yung mga bubo, ganyan. And many other things. No? When you hunt for bigger game, iba na naman yun. No? How do they make their traps? And many other questions. Okay, so next. What was the climate then? So hindi lang puros mga artifacts o yung mga bones ang tinitignan natin or yung mga pagkain nila. Minsan nagtatanong din tayo, ano yung kalagayan ng kapaligiran noon? Okay? Ano yung kalagayan? Because we are interested in, for example, the populations, their populations. Are they capable of sustaining large populations? Because the climate, for example, would dictate what kinds of plants and animals and the quantities of them, no, that were living during that time. Which then dictates how much they can sustain themselves. Were they affected, for example, by natural calamities? Baka halimbawa merong volcanic eruption, no, which affected climate. No? So we can, for example, determine situations about climate by looking at the characteristics of the soil, no? Meron ba halimbawang volcanic eruption? Maybe we can look at the isotopes of certain elements, no? Chemical elements. Maybe we can also look at the types of the types of animals then, no, would also determine the climate. No? For example, in Ilocos, no, in Lake Paway, they have been doing sedimentological studies of Lake Paway, and they found out that in the distant past, there seems to be a cooler climate then, no? Because they have found plants and trees, no, that were growing in colder situations. Okay? Unlike today, when you look at Ilocos Norte, mainit. So those are examples. And then what things did they use? Halimbawa in everyday life, no, we are talking here mostly of everyday life, no, kasi yung patterns we see it being enacted, no, mostly in their everyday life. Ano ba yung mga ginamit nila na nakagamitang pambahay? How did they cook their food, no? What types of instruments did they use? How did they make what they would like to have, for example? So things like that. No? Halimbawa, what kind of tools were they using? No? Did they use stone tools? Did they use metal tools? And how did they make that? No? How did they acquire that? No? Maybe they were not making that, but they traded. They did some trading, no, in order to acquire those things. Okay, and aside from that, what did they do for a living? Did they trade? Did they plant crops or tended animals, and then did they trade it with some other communities? No, especially with regards the surplus, no, of these activities. So what did they trade? How did they trade? No? Hindi lang ano yan, basta bili, benta, ganon. Hindi lang ganon, no? They came in several forms. Maybe they gave it as a gift, no? In certain contexts, but not always. And then where did these things came from? For example, did they mine, halimbawa, the stone they were using for stone tools? Or did they mine metal ores in order to make metals? Yung kinain halimbawa nila, did they take care of those plants and animals? Or did they acquire it from some other communities? Okay. Another thing, what was the form of settlement and community? So we are looking here at interpersonal relationships, maybe, and interfamilial relationships, even intra-familiar and intra-communal, community relationships. How was the community organized? So, because generally we can see this when we examine their habitation, how they build their houses, their buildings. What kind of houses did they build? Was there a common space for each individual and for each household? where their spaces specialized for certain functions. For example, those of you who are familiar with Igorot communities in the Cordillera region, no? Meron halimbawang mga meeting places diyan. No? Diba? For example, especially those in the remote barangays, when they do meetings, they would call participants and then they would meet at a particular place or a house. May chat message. Tungtungan, no, for the Ibaloys. No? Okay, from Epodio. Tungtungan. No? So generally, tungtong, no? Tungtong kasi in Ilocano and the other languages in the Cordillera would mean to talk about it. No? Okay, pagkwentuhan. So tungtungan would also apply to the place of meetings. Tungtungan. Ano pa? In the Mangyan communities, there's a particular, I have seen this, no? And at the time I was not yet married, so they advised me not to sleep with a regular family, no? A regular household or family, no? So they said that I should be sleeping in a house where the bachelors were staying. No? So doon kayo matutulog, no? Doon yung bahay nyo. I think in the Cordillera region they also have this form of living quarters for particular sectors of people, no? Maybe bachelors, unmarried men or unmarried women, okay? Elders, etc. Okay, another message. Ator Olo. For Aldous, anong community ito? Also in Benguet?
Yeah, Benguet sir, napanood ko kasi sa documentary nung walang rape sa Bontoc. Yun yung tawag nila dun sa mga institutions na nagse-separate sa male and female. In
Bontoc, in the mountain province?
Yeah.
Okay, sige, thank you. Yes, mountain province. Okay. Okay, was the society stratified? Ibig sabihin, pumapasok dito yung question ng yung issue ng equality or egalitarianism and ranked, R-A-N-K, no? Ranked society. Kasi sinasabi natin na yung mga naunang lipunan or yung mga unang the first societies, no? If you look at the spectrum of development, they were more simple than the following quote-unquote levels of social organization. But I think you are familiar with this. No? So how would you describe them? No? Are they egalitarian or relatively equal? Each member have equal status to each other, or are they ranked? There is an elite class, there is a commoner class, and perhaps there is a slave class or an untouchable class, no, when it comes to Indian society, traditional Indian society. Okay, ito na yon, no? How did people look? Yung tanong kanina, no? Kasi dito pumapasok yung methods natin in physical anthropology in describing the most probable characteristic of people in the past. No? For example, what was their heights? What was their facial and skull dimensions? No? Skull dimensions or cranial dimensions when we refer to the skull or the head, the bony part of the head. So how did they look? No? Malaki ba yung mata nila? Maliit? No? That can be measured by the size of the orbits, no? Yung butas na kung saan nakalagay yung mata. Or do they have a a high nose, no? O malapad ba? No? Nasusukat din yan in the bones. The message again, yung size po ng hand to be able to grip po, no? Partly yes, no, I think yes, some anthropologists have done this, no, with regards to populations in the mountain province. Oo, nakakita ako ng ano niyan, may mga studies na ganyan, no? And then what sorts of illness did they have? Ayan na, no? Yung tanong kanina. Unfortunately, we are only limited to the illnesses that can be manifested in bones. No? Otherwise, if we have other sources like archival or written evidence, no? Documentary evidence, then perhaps we can infer what kind of illnesses they were having during that time. So for example, for infectious diseases, I think we cannot determine yet if they suffered from influenza or this particular viral diseases, no, where COVID-19 is part of. But we can infer that perhaps they may or may not have suffered from tuberculosis, because tuberculosis can manifest itself in bone, no? But not always, no? Only if they have infected bone. Because most of our cases right now, for example, no, with regards to tuberculosis, they only affect lungs, no? The lungs. So things like that, no? What else? Cardiovascular diseases would be hard to infer. Maybe we can infer if they were anemic during that time, no? Because some types of anemia, no, not all of them, no, can have telltale signs in bone. Of course, fractures, no? Fractures, healed fractures also can be seen in bone. And the osteological diseases like arthritis can manifest in bone. This is one of the most popular topics with regards to pathologies or the study of illnesses in anthropology. Time check, ano oras na? 7:15. Okay, 7:15, we only have 10 minutes to go. And then what bodily manipulations were they doing? Pag sinabing bodily manipulations were they, di ba sa atin ngayon, no? So, ano ba yung bodily manipulations sa ginagawa natin ngayon, no? For girls, for example, yes, tattoos, no, is a type of bodily manipulation, no? Especially the permanent tattooing. Okay, for girls, yes, piercing, no? Mabanggitin ko sana 'yon. Ear piercing. And then, yes, from hands, lotus feet sa China, yes. I don't know if they're still doing that. Maybe not present.
So, tas yung sa leeg po, nakalimutan ko po yung country.
Yes, tama.
Yung pagpapahaba po ng leeg.
Yes, Aldo. Sa ano yun? Sa Myanmar, Burma. And Northern Thailand. Northern Thailand, Myanmar, yung area na yun. There is an ethnic group that is practicing that. No? And for some in Africa, no, some ethnic groups there, yung mga babae naman, yung genitalia ng babae, no? May manipulation din na ginagawa. No? For us, halimbawa, no, in the Philippines, yung circumcision, no, para sa lalaki. Okay, from Carl, there is a question. Is collapse of civilizations unavoidable? Kasi pag sinabing collapse of civilization, medyo kailangan natin i-qualify yung term na yon. It can mean more than one thing. No? In general, of course, no, we can expect that all civilizations will collapse. Halimbawa at present, no, the way we are doing things, and if we are not taking care of our environment and of ourselves, later on, no, may mangyayaring hindi maganda. And like the other civilizations of the past, no, for example, the Mayan civilization, ano ba yung mga classic examples natin? The Mayan of Guatemala and southern Mexico, of Easter Island in Chile. Ano pa? Siguro yung the people that built Angkor Wat, no, in Cambodia. Maybe they have been they were part of a process, no, that was leading into an inevitable well, we can say collapse, no, but an end to their civilization, no? Kasi pwede rin naman natapos yung kanilang empire, no? Lahat naman ng empires, no? Empires, states, nation states, kingdoms would come to an end, no? Yung mga iba nga lang mabibilis kaysa sa iba. So for example, the present nation states we are having now, the Republic of the Philippines, US, ano pa, PROC, People's Republic of China, and so on, no? In due time, no, pwede yan mawala din, no? Just like other polities in the past, no? Minsan nandun pa rin, pero it takes the form, it takes another form. So halimbawa, the Malay civilization, no, it was an empire before, and then it was conquered by the Portuguese, and then they have to transfer, no, from Malacca to Johor, and then transfer again when Europeans invaded southern Malaysia, diba? But still they were still there, no? Their descendants were still there, no? Pero hindi na nga lang in empire form, no? They are now part of Malaysia, and some are in Singapore, and some are in Indonesia, no? Things like that, no? Ganon din halimbawa sa atin, no, in the Philippines. Atlantis, no, you have mentioned about Atlantis, no? This is questionable, no? So most archaeologists do not believe in this, and they have regarded this as a myth. But some, especially those who are persistent, no, would still believe in this, no? Although conventionally, in the field of archaeology, people or scholars have relegated it to the realm of mythology. Sabi nila halimbawa yung Atlantis daw ay baka ito yung island ng Thera, no? Thera, no? I don't have my whiteboard marker here, no? I should bring this next time. I should get this. Nandun lang naman sa tokador, pero hahanapin ko pa so that I can write, no, the spelling. Thera, Thera, Santorini in Greece. No, sinasabi nila na baka yung Atlantis ay ito yung Santorini na talaga, no? Because of what people have experienced in Santorini in the past, no? Especially ilang years ago yon, 1, 2, 3, 10, 20, 30, 35 centuries ago, no? Around that time. Okay, hindi lang sa Roman Empire, no? Even before the Roman Empire, no? Kasi matagal na yung Santorini, no? It was destroyed by a volcanic eruption. Isang malakas na volcanic eruption that perhaps it led to the spread, no? To the evacuation of some of its inhabitants. No? Maybe many have died, no? But maybe some have escaped the disaster that happened. Okay. So, yes, Carlo, meron kang... Ay, hindi. Kanina pa pala ito. Okay, wala munang wala pa ako nakikitang bagong tanong. We still have a few more minutes. Okay, this would be the last slide. How would you describe their belief system? So ito ay isang medyo mataas na antas ng pagtatanong. No? Bakit ko nasabing mataas na antas, no? At a higher level? Because it is one of the more difficult things to ask. No? When you inquire about the belief systems, you have to make sure, no, that what you are that the artifacts or the material evidences that you are relying upon would tell you something, no, about cognitive thought processes. Kasi pag compared to food, for example, it would be easier, no? If you can see some chicken bones there that was intentionally broken up, you would readily infer that it was used as food, diba? Pero with regards belief system or even political organization, no, it is harder, no, to infer political organization and belief system than it is for food, no? Yung economic foundations ng isang society. Okay? At maraming klase yan, no? We are only familiar with the many forms of Christian beliefs, no? Belief systems. And also maybe some indigenous belief systems. So like most of you there in the Cordillera Administrative Region. No? Pero hindi lang din naman yun ang pwedeng basehan. And then what complicates matters would be the mixing of these practices or forms. So for example, if you are studying the proto-historic period, that period where the pre-colonial society is next to the start of the colonial period, may makikita kayong mixing of belief systems. So some may have been Christianized already, baptized, and were practicing Catholicism, but in many parts of their everyday life, they also would still pray to the native gods and goddesses. For example, in their funeral rituals, they would still be practicing their original way of burying or disposing of the dead. Okay, so these are more complicated matters. Okay, so it is now already time, and we will continue this next meeting. I will be posting again the link. Okay. So, do you have any questions? Sige, isang question. Time check 7:26. Questions pa? Wala na? Okay, none. Okay, so Aldous nagganon na. So, none. No? Ano pa? Wala na? Okay. So, if none, thank you again for attending. I hope you have received something this meeting, and I also hope that you will attend again next meeting. Palagi kayong mag-iingat, and good evening to you all again. You may leave the session.
Good evening,
Salamat
sir.
po, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Ingat, sir. Thank you po.